So we do the same thing every single time. Tell the people who you are, what you do, and what you've been up to.
Yeah, my name's Dan Kovalik, and I live in Pittsburgh. I was a labor lawyer for 26 years, and now I'm a writer. I've written 6 books now. My latest one is Cancel This Book, which we're going to talk about today. Yeah, that's about it for me for now.
Well, go ahead and plug your other books. I think it's well, go ahead and plug your other books first, and then we'll get to my next statement.
Yeah, so my other books are related more to U.S. foreign policy. So I have the first book I did is The Plot to Scapegoat Russia, which really goes after this Russiagate nonsense, which I think it is nonsense. The next one is The Plot to Attack Iran, and that I wrote after visiting Iran in 2017. I have The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela. I've been to Venezuela a number of times, and again, it's about U.S. intervention in Venezuela. And then I have No More War, which is a book which really criticizes so-called humanitarian interventionism, which is, I argue, rarely humanitarian. I have The Plot to Control the World, which I talk about the U.S.'s numerous interventions in undermining democracy in other countries. And then I have this most recent book, Cancel This Book, The Progressive Case Against Cancel Culture.
That's really impressive. As far as I'm concerned, I can't imagine having the time to write that many books. And it seems like you've done all of that in a rather condensed amount of time, because all of those, for the most part, those topics are relatively recent.
Yeah, I started the first book I published, The Plot to Scapegoat Russia, was in June of 2017. So I've written 6 books since then, so less than 4 years.
I mean, do you do anything else?
I actually do. What I do when I write a book, and like right now, I'm not writing a book. When I have a book contract, I try to write about 1,000 words a day, and I can do that, in a couple hours. So I can write a book and do other stuff too. So.
Right on. Well, actually, it's kind of funny, and this would actually get into the theme of your book, but I don't know if you listen to Jordan Peterson at all, but when he talks about writing his books, he talks about making like a habit of writing, and that's kind of, I think that was around the number that he said, bang out about 1,000 words. He's like, it's better than having no words. He's like, and then if you go back, maybe you keep only 100, maybe you keep 500, maybe you keep 800, but it's all about, making sure that you have things on pages rather than always just trying to mull it over in your brain until you have something perfect to put on the page.
That's right. I think, and there is a general maxim that perfectionism, I think, is a inhibitor of productivity. You can't get it perfect the first time, and you shouldn't try. As you say, to be a writer, you write. As one guy said, if you're a writer who doesn't write, you're a waiter.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah.
So, so I try to write. And even when I'm not writing a book, I write. I always have some writing project. I write a lot of articles. I'm writing right now an afterword for someone else's book. I'm always writing. So I guess I'm a writer. I guess I can say that.
Excellent. I respect it. I still blog a little bit, but I used to be a blogger a lot. So the amount of having to just pump out words all the time, I respect entirely. And also having having the vocabulary to constantly pull from that's not overly repetitive. We're this guy just says this word all the time. So why don't we dig into this? So I got really excited that you said that you would be on here. I've seen you on different podcasts. I've seen you with Chris Hedges, who I adore, David Pakman, Crystal Ball, Kyle Kalinske. The fact that you're sitting here with me is kind of mind blowing, you know, considering
Thank
where
you.
they are and who I am. And then obviously when I must have at some point missed the fact that you were, you know, a steelworker representative, but you know, I caught that on Crystal Kyle and Friends. And so I had to reach out to you because of the Pittsburgh roots. And obviously I agree with everything that you're saying. I think our politics are relatively, you know, right in line, if not completely in line. And so, yeah, I just had to touch base. I just think that it's good to know people that are kind of running in parallel with each other, if they're, especially if we can be local. So I definitely wanted to talk to you and bring you on. So like I said, in like the like I guess in our little pre-chat, since your new book is focused on what I would consider like a self-cannibalizing aspect of like this existing culture war, I want to use your specific legal background to like circularly arrive back to the book. So like my impression in the culture right now is that there's a lot of younger professionals who have not been in unions, and probably that their parents aren't in unions either. So like the amount of understanding that they have of unions is probably slim to none. Like it's probably all just kind of what is, I would say, disingenuously fed to them via the media. So do you think that you can kind of lay out like a foundational 101 level understanding about unions?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think in general, my belief is that unions are the biggest and most important vehicle for social change in the United States and probably in the world. Um, a union essentially is an organization of working people who combine, usually within an industry and within an employment relationship, combine to organize and agitate for better wages, for better safety conditions, better working conditions in general, for benefits like health care, because we don't have national health care here in this country. As you know, health care is employer based.
Yeah, it's tied to having a job.
Yeah, and if you don't have a union, you usually don't have those benefits, by the way. You know, it's rare that unless you're in upper management, you're not going to have health care unless you have a union. Unions also negotiate just cause for discharge. I mean, most people don't understand, unless you have a union with a just cause clause, you can be fired for no reason or any reason at all, right? Unions protect people's employment, protect people from being fired unjustly. And again, that's on the ground level, but on the macro level, unions have done more to push for social change in this country than any one institution. You know, we would not have Social Security without unions. We would not have a 40-hour work week without unions. We would not have weekends without unions. We would not have basic safety, work safety protections without unions. You know, if you look at the mining industry, which still exists in this country, it's much smaller, but you know, mining was one of the most dangerous jobs in America, and it became less dangerous because of the union, the United Mine Workers, which again also pushed for federal safety regulations. So yeah, we would not have had the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt without the agitation of unions. So unions are an important part of the social justice movement. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that, or if they ever knew it, right?
Right. And I think that that's my point exactly, is I think it's kind of escaping the purview of culture right now. I just don't think people are involved in them or even have them kind of in their orbit at all. So they don't really understand like the power to strike and withhold labor and why that's so important, and like what the impact of that can be, you know, at large. You know, that they're just kind of They just kind of see it as if people strike, it's inconvenient for them, which it really is the point, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like if they strike, then yeah, all those things that you basically are taking for granted, you know, the production of that slows down. All of that stuff that you find valuable, it's those people that you haven't been, you know, correctly prioritizing. They're the ones that are making it possible. Like, so yeah, I do think that there's that connection was missing. So I really wanted you to bring that forth. And so I'm glad you did. And obviously, I'm sure you followed the Amazon issue in Bessemer.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to lay a little bit of how much like mainstream media news do you watch? Because I don't know what the coverage was like for this.
Yeah, well, the one thing I listen to is NPR, which I honestly I hate, but I do listen to it. It's kind of a habit, like cocaine or something. But without the
a bad girlfriend, you just keep going back.
They covered it pretty well, and I would say sympathetically. I would say that, again, what I gleaned from NPR and some other news sources, that the more liberal media seem to, I would say, have supportive coverage of that campaign. In addition, there were a lot of celebrities and politicians who publicly supported it, which was all good, all to the good. As we know, they lost pretty badly in the vote. And the union attributes it to, and I think they're largely right in this regard. Well, there are a couple things. One, employer intimidation tactics. You know, employers are very good at, in subtle and not so subtle ways, saying, hey, if you unionize, maybe we'll move somewhere else, right?
Right.
And you'll lose your job, you know. And employers are not allowed to do that specifically because a place is unionized. They're not allowed to threaten that either explicitly, but they find ways to imply it. And it's a very powerful thing. The other thing that again, a lot of people I think did not consider is the fact that we have this pandemic. So what this did, prevented the union from doing the most important thing they need to do to organize the shop, and that is visit door to door, visit people's homes, because it's very hard to visit them otherwise. And in fact, Amazon made it harder and harder. They in fact changed. So a lot of the union organizing took place outside the plant gate. And apparently there's a stoplight there.
I was just going to ask you if you knew about the stoplight.
Yeah, and apparently Amazon got the stoplight changed so that the traffic would fly through quicker and there wouldn't be a chance to talk to the workers. So if there's no way to talk to them there and there's no way to talk to them in their homes, it's very hard to organize people. It's very hard to organize just calling people. You know, it is because of the employer intimidation, because of people's fears that they have anyway, that they might lose their employment if they cross the employer. It's important to build up that trust through face-to-face meetings. And that was very, very, very difficult given the things we just said. And so they lost, you know, which was sad, because I think that a victory there would have been contagious. I think, you know, it would have led to much more organizing, though I still think that is going to happen. I mean, you know, the fascinating thing that's happening right now, of course, that we're seeing is that workers basically are on strike against every employer right now. You see that employers cannot find people to hire.
Right.
People have basically said, I'm not going to work for you for peanuts. And I think what workers saw during the pandemic, especially during the early months, is everyone was saying, oh, thank you, essential workers. And they were treated like shit, not only by the employers, but a lot by the more privileged members of the public, right? And I saw this great quote, I don't know who came up with it, but whoever was a genius. And they said, definition of lockdown. And it was, privileged people getting working class people to bring, privileged people hiding while working class people brought stuff to them.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. And apparently, and I saw a number of posts in this regard, by and large, people, the privileged who were hiding, were not giving tips. And the reason this was, and again, it kind of relates to what we said about the campaign at Amazon, because they didn't have to look those people in the eye.
Right.
They weren't coming up to your door knocking and giving you the food. They were dropping the food on the porch and knocking and going away because of social distancing. Well, apparently a lot of people took that as an invitation not to tip them because they didn't have to confront the people that were bringing them stuff. So, and of course, waiters, waitresses weren't working by and large and getting tipped. Anyway, society as a whole, I would say, while applauding the so-called essential workers, repaid them with scorn.
Right.
And I think the working class has been conscientiousized and has said, fuck you, if I can say that on your show.
You can absolutely swear.
And honestly, it's kind of inspiring. It's like, you see the signs. Have you seen signs posted like on a Wendy's saying, we all quit?
Right.
Restaurant closed. And so what you're seeing is a general strike. It's not being organized by unions. But this is a classic way that workers show their anger. And they're going to have to pay people a decent wage or they're just not going to work. So, what, and I'm jumping ahead of myself, but what has to happen is for unions and other groups to harness this anger.
Yes.
And this resentment to build a better movement. This is a great time to organize unions. This is a great time to organize generally for social change. The Democrats screwed the working class by claiming that some unelected person,
the parliamentarian that
no one ever heard of, but the all-powerful Graham Poobah, the parliamentarian that no one voted for, prevented the $15 minimum wage from getting on the Senate floor. This is one of the greatest boondoggles in history, right?
And I've wanted to shake all of these people who now have the word parliamentarian in their mouth, right? And they're like, oh, the parliamentarian is what blocked the $15 minimum wage. And I was like, do you know what the Republicans did the last time the parliamentarian said that their thing wasn't able to go into a bill? They fired them and they got somebody in there who would approve it. I was like, this is how you know that the Democrats just didn't want to fight for it.
In fact, I think the rational assumption is that probably someone called the parliamentarian, either Biden or Harris, and said, you better kill this thing because we don't want this to go forward, but we don't want people to know we don't want it to go forward.
Well, Biden kind of signaled that. And I don't want to go crazy into politics on here, but Biden definitely said I'm not sure if this one's going to really make it into the bill. He didn't give the other side of that, or he didn't give you a different spin on that argument, which is this might not make it into the bill or whatever, but we're so committed to it and we're going to fight for it and we're going to make our case for it and we're going to make sure that this gets through no matter what. So they can block it here, but we're going to make sure that this gets pushed through. He just kind of was oh, the parliamentarian just is in the way.
Yeah, and by the way, what was being proposed was a joke anyway. It was $15 an hour by something like 2023 or something like that.
Yeah.
$15 isn't enough. That's not enough. And to say we're not going to give it to you for a few years, that itself was a joke, and they wouldn't even do that. So, but this is going to propel this. This is going to, and frankly, even if it's not put into law, they're going to have to pay people better, or they're not going to come to work, and they shouldn't. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point where, people are kind of doing this uncoordinated general strike, you're already starting to hear employers demonizing the unemployment plus up. You know, people don't want to come back to work. We're having a hard time finding workers. It's like you're having a hard time figuring out that you're not compensating people correctly. That's the problem. Like, you've been padding your pockets this entire time, and what you're not doing is, I mean, it would have been beautiful if Trump was correct and trickle down economics was a real thing, but it's not. And these people just keep taking their money from the top and putting it in their pockets, and workers are getting the shaft. Like,
and during the pandemic, it was even worse.
Way worse.
The rich got trillions of dollars richer, and the working class got trillions of dollars poorer. The lockout was used as a means to fleece the working class. And, you know, something that really, and again, I am just having a bit of a stream of consciousness, but I have to express this. Like, first of all, I have to say, I have my vaccines. I had coronavirus. Okay. It is a problem. We had to deal with it as a society. Some form of lockdown, if you want to call it that, was necessary. But the way this lockdown was carried out favored the rich, favored the well-to-do middle class who could work from their homes with computers,
right,
and screwed workers. And what really irritated me was that many liberals who claim to care, I guess they claim to care about workers, maybe they don't even claim to, but who should care about workers, were the most strident in condemning people for questioning the lockout or the lockdown. There was a lot of questioning that should have been done. There was a better way to do this.
Yeah.
There was a fairer way to do this. You can't let Walmart operate unmolested and then tell the mom and pop store and the mom and pop barbershop that they can't open.
Right.
Okay, that was not fair. And then when people said it wasn't fair, they were said, "Oh, you're a granny killer," and all this. That irritates me, and I really was disgusted by that, and continue to be. And not just the people, you know, felt that way, but that they felt so morally righteous to condemn people for saying, "Hey, maybe this isn't fair." You know, I saw one thing, and I quote it in the book. I don't even know who this guy was. Again, I saw a random Facebook post that was incredible. He said, this guy was saying that he flew 20 times or so during the pandemic. And he said each time the flight attendant would say, you know, we will not be having food service because of social distancing in the pandemic when they started the flight. Then they close the curtain and start feeding everyone in first class. And, you know, this was symbolic of what happened during the pandemic. The first people in first class, they weren't inconvenienced a bit. In fact, their lives were awesome. They didn't have to go to work. They sat around at their computers in their fuzzy slippers, and were condemning the people in coach for squealing about what was happening. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting, you know, ahead of myself, but
I think that goes to just like all of these examples are kind of it's almost a carbon copy of just like what it's been for at least. And I can't really speak to being a part of the working class. I'm not like I have my own startup, yes, but I'm also working in tech. So I'm also the fuzzy slipper guy behind the computer as well. So I kind of have like, I have like toes in both pies, but.
And I'm a fuzzy slipper guy. I'll be the first to say it.
Right.
You know, and I, you know, and I'm grateful. I'm happy about that. I know, but I understand that that's a privilege, and I understand that many people don't have that privilege, and you have to call out that unfairness.
Right. And I guess the point was, and you were kind of getting there, or kind of already stated it, but it was so unnuanced, just overly politicized. Like, it was black or white without any consideration for a person's like what their actual conditions were, what their lifestyle was like, the amount of struggle that they were dealing with, the amount of relief they weren't getting, like all of these things were kind of thrown out, in kind of with the priority that we argue with each other and kind of like shut down one's opinion because this one was 100% correct. I heard this one on NBC. This is what the Democrats are saying. Like, this is whatever. Or the other side, I heard this on Fox News. This is what the Republicans are saying. Like, this is the right thing. Like, these people, and I guess this kind of gets to a question I was going to ask you later, but like, we might as well just we're not really going to circumvent anymore. We might as well just dive into the content of your book. This cancel culture that is going on is wildly unproductive.
Right.
Like, there is nothing about it that is landing us in a better conversation, that's ending us up with better information. And it really does kind of pit everybody against each other. And I don't know, do you, I'm sure you're probably familiar with Matt Taibbi, correct?
I do. I read him a lot. I do cite him in the book. Yeah, of course.
Right. So Hate Inc., right?
Yeah, I couldn't write the book without citing him.
Right. Yeah. So you're familiar with Hate Inc., and basically, yes, like the concept is like the media had, decided that if we can't constantly be creating new enemies, so they just made an enemy of the people of the other side. So everybody is now just attacking each other. And for the first time, this came out maybe a couple months ago, right after I think it was right after the Capitol riot, that the American people now see each other as one of the biggest threats, not the pandemic, not a foreign invader, like
not our government,
not our government. We see each other as a bigger threat. So they walk outside and they're more skeptical of like their neighbor than they are of, I don't know, corporations or, the corruption of their government officials or anything like that. To me is terrifying. And
yeah, it's destroyed solidarity is what it's done. And I don't think I articulated this in the book because I've, as I've had interviews and stuff about the book, I've thought about some things. And the thing that occurred to me is that, in 2012 with the Occupy movement, they had this slogan, which is the best thing to come out of the Occupy movement, the slogan, the 99% and the 1%. So it's the 99% of us against the 1% who own 50% of the wealth of this country. Right. That was beautiful, right? And what that says is we're all in the same boat. All of us, except those 1%, right?
Right.
Now, and there's a lot, I don't know all the dynamics that have created this, but what has been created is it's not the 99% versus the 1%. It's the 50% or like the 47% and 47% against each other. And the 1% is laughing all the way to the bank. This is a wet dream for the 1%.
And the 47% and 47% are chipping off pieces at the bottom, which are then just turning into smaller groups of like kind of not, I don't want to say like radicalized, but definitely like they're extreme in the fact that they're all banding together because they've been ostracized by both sides at that point.
Well, yeah, well, and therein may lie where a new political party might exist or whatever. I think, as a progressive, as someone who wants a better world and a better country, the goal should be to bring as many people into our tent as possible to do that, right? Again, try to get to the 99% where we're all together against the 1%. That'll never happen, of course, but hey, that should be the goal. Right? Instead, with this cancel culture, as you say, we're finding more and more reasons to shun people, to push people out of the tent. And this is counterproductive to social justice. This has nothing to do with social justice. I learned a term, again, after I wrote the book and being interviewed about the book, I learned a term, a Freudian term called the narcissism of small differences. And this is what's happening here. And what Freud talked about was when you have a society that is somewhat tribal in nature, the various tribes will find small reasons to kick people out of their tribes, frankly, in order to have a sense of belonging within their tribe, right? To cleanse the tribe of the unholy and unwashed, right? Now, I think that is what's happening with this cancel culture. It's a means of people to feel good about themselves and righteous by pushing others, even those who agree with them on almost everything, but they find, oh, but you don't agree with me on, all gender issues. So goodbye, you're gone. This has nothing to do with building a movement. A movement-oriented left does the opposite. They're like, hey, you and I disagree on many things, but what we agree on is that workers are getting screwed and we need to change that. What we agree on is that war is bad, that the country's spending too much money on war, not enough on us. Let's get together. And of course, the irony on that issue is that I find that liberals have given up on that issue. They don't care about war anymore.
It definitely seems like it's out of sight, out of mind. It's not here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And conservatives, actually, a lot of them do care about it. That's an irony, but I see that as a good thing. So let's work together on that issue. Instead, people are like, don't talk to them. They're conservatives. Oh, yeah, they may be against war, but you don't talk to them and work with them, right? That's insane. And one of the great examples of where the liberal and even left, if you call it that, has gone off the rails on that issue is Democracy Now! Right? They used to be called the War and Peace Report, I think for most of their existence. Now they're the Quarantine Report. Fuck you and your quarantine. That's what right. That's a joke. And they supported the war on Libya. And Libya now is a hellhole, thanks to that intervention. They attack every, independence movement around the world. So they've totally gone over, right? And now they're the Quarantine Report. And now we have Amy Goodman telling us to socially distance and wear masks. Again, I'm fine. I do those things. We should do those things. I don't need Amy Goodman to tell me that, okay? Right. That's not why I go to Democracy Now! But that's all they have left for me, is to tell me what everyone else is telling me. Well, then you're useless as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, that's where the left has just gone off the rails for me.
Right. And so and to your point where you were kind of getting to where you were talking about hey, we have these things in common and why don't, even though we disagree on other stuff, why don't we work on this much larger thing? That's kind of where I was going with our union discussion, because what as I understand it, and I'm sure you can confirm, you're involved in them much deeper than I am. It is people that are of, they're different sexes, they're different races, they're different religions, they're different, everything about them, their social background, their family background, their neighborhoods, or whatever. All of this is completely different, but they are, in one aspect, they are completely unified so that they can work for bigger goals together and collectively, make a greater good for them.
Yes, absolutely. And this is what I talk about in my book. I happen to have had the privilege of, for many years, representing District 8 of the Steelworkers, which is Appalachia. right? I represented people in West Virginia, Kentucky, the Appalachian regions in Virginia, Maryland. And these are people who, I talk about this in my book. If they walked in your house or they walked in the restaurant, many people would say, look at that. Look at those, hillbillies with their Harley Davidsons and their tattoos with the American flag on them. And they got their West Virginia drawl. And they must be a bunch of racist and hoo-has, right? These were very intelligent people who were militant unionists, who I respected greatly, and who respected me, by the way. And I have my statue of Lenin here. I had that at work, and they didn't give a shit.
Right.
They didn't buy any of that stuff, but they thought it was cute. And look, on a lot of issues, I'm sure we disagreed. I'm sure many of those people are pro-life, for example. I'm sure many of them are not up to date on the latest, iterations of gender that are out there. But that didn't matter because we were working on trying to improve people's lives, as you say, regardless of race, regardless of gender. But they tended to be much more enlightened than many people in terms of those issues. The steelworkers fought for trans rights within the workplace. And that's the official line of the steelworkers, is to support trans rights in the workplace in terms of bathroom rights, that sort of thing. So these were great people that I worked with. But it's those people that are being vilified right now. They're being looked down upon by the elite left, which is pretty much all that's left of the left. By people who think they know better and think that people in West Virginia should just, be freaking, should just secede from the union because, they're all a bunch of rednecks. And that bothers me. That bothers me a lot, especially given if you look at West Virginia, first of all, why is it West Virginia? Because it didn't want to be a slave state, so it left Virginia. It has some of the greatest history of worker rebellion in this country, right?
Right.
And that has to be respected. And even it's not old history. Remember, a couple of years ago, there were those big wildcat teacher strikes in West Virginia. And yet those people have been vilified, and I'll give an example of this. Again, maybe I'm doing too much stream of consciousness.
Nah, but, keep rolling.
Yeah.
Keep rolling. The
greatest slur against the people of Appalachia and West Virginia in particular is the book and the movie Deliverance, right? Where, these middle-class guys, yuppies, I don't know if that's a term people use anymore, but these urban professionals go on a camping trip. They meet up with the locals in West Virginia, and of course, who rape them, right?
Right.
Of course, that happens every day. And you know what's funny about that story is it was inspired by real events. The author was on a canoe trip. I don't think it was in West Virginia. It might have been Georgia. I'm not sure, but and his car broke down along the side of the road, and he was approached by the locals, who I guess were people who again might be called hillbillies or whatever, and they proceeded to help him and get his car started and let him go on his way. So he thanks these people by writing a book and a screenplay that portrays them as rapists, okay? But this is it. We're left with Deliverance, and we're left with Hillary Clinton calling those people deplorables. And the left in this country, a lot on the left, and people say, oh, you're not making a distinction between liberals and leftists. Well, I'm not, because many times they don't make a distinction between themselves. People who think they're leftists are not, in my view, many times, because they don't care about working people. If you don't care about working people, you're not a leftist, even if you call yourself that, Right.
Well, so I kind of wanted to get into this in like a more almost like a more philosophical way, like pulling from basically like the playbook of Chris Hedges and like this Chris Hedges school of thought. Like, why do you think it is that people engage in cancel culture pylons? And does it appear that there's like a certain classification of people that are engaging in it? And obviously we're talking about, you know, the elite left for sure. You know, the right does it too, but they kind of do it. I honestly, I think they do it in response to the left because it seems to be like a useful tool for the left. So they're like, well, you know, it's working for you. We'll do whenever it's, you know, it satisfies us, even though it runs completely, you know, counter to most of the points that we make. But what I guess what I'm saying is, why do you think, you know, why do you think it is that, what do you think is like the underlying cause that people are engaging in this?
Well, I think, and I talk about this in my book, and I do quote Hedges on this because Hedges has been writing about this for some time. And I agree with him that one of the factors is that cancel culture is the politics of despair. Okay. It is the politics of fatalism. It is done by people who consciously or unconsciously have given up on real social change. They feel like, I'm not going to change the world. I'm not going to get Medicare for all for people. And again, not because I don't want to, but I don't know how to. I can't, you know, it's very hard to organize. This is a giant country, right? With a very powerful government, a very powerful military, a very powerful police force. It is hard to make profound social change. So in the absence of that, I think a lot of people are like, okay, I can't do that. I just can't, even though I'd want to. I can't. I don't know how. So my activism is going to be sitting here at my computer and attacking people online because they misstep or misspeak. I think that's largely what this is about. This is a phony type of activism which gives people you know, an endorphin rush, which makes people feel self-righteous, which makes people feel like they're activists and doing something when they're doing nothing except harassing people, most of whom don't deserve to be harassed. You know, most of whom, if they do say something that might be, you know, a shade off in terms of politics, might be called on the phone and said, hey, you may want to rethink that, right? No, it's gotcha, right? And some people deny that this is happening. We know this is happening. We know, you know, and I give many examples in the book, crazy things where this professor appeared to have fallen asleep during a Zoom call on racial diversity, and students called for her to be fired for falling asleep.
Right.
You know,
as those Zoom calls are super compelling.
They're
you know what I mean?
compelling.
Like, it's the most engaging way, you know?
None of us would fall asleep on a Zoom call. I mean, this is craziness. And again, what I go back to, I do think a lot of this is the culture, you know, the politics of despair. I also think that, again, it has a logic of its own where people, you know, I don't know if cancel culture is the best term. And of course, I wrote a whole book using that term, but that's what it's called. But it is a culture. It is a culture that's been created in which people are patted on the back for piling on against an individual. It has this kind of witch hunt quality, as well described in Arthur Miller's book. Remind me of the name. The one on the witch trials, The Crucible.
The Crucible. Yeah.
And it has that feel like she's a witch. She's a witch. She's a witch. Because if I don't say she's a witch, they're going to think I'm a witch.
Right.
And that's exactly what's happening.
Going along to get along, basically.
Going along to get along. Right. One, because I will be supported if I pile on. And two, if I don't pile on. Or worse, if I defend this person, I'm going to be canceled too. Right.
Right.
And I think that's a big thing. That I mean, I think the cancel culture works because people are coerced into silence.
And it's a tough position to be. Say you can spot the flaw, right? You see the cancel culture, you see the pile-on, happening, and then you stick your neck out. But if you don't have any sort of lever of power, if you don't have any sort of leverage, a network behind you of support that will back you up because you pointed out something that probably should be obvious to everybody, that's it for you too. You're now out.
That's absolutely right. And we see this all the time. And I think if anything comes away from my book, it's one has to understand the need to defend people who deserve to be defended. And if you are sitting around seeing someone attacked who you think is unjustly attacked, you may even be a friend or a colleague, you have to stand up for those people. I mean, that's right. How to stop this stuff is to say, this is bullshit. Okay. And again, for those who haven't read the book, I mean, it was inspired by what happened here in Pittsburgh to a long-term friend and colleague of mine, Molly Rush.
I did want to ask you about that situation, so I'm glad you're getting into it.
Yeah, who helped found the Thomas Merton Center, one of the oldest peace and justice groups in America, who has been an activist her whole life, who has organized for peace, organized for Black construction workers to be admitted into the construction industry when they were being kept out. Last May, she posted a meme that had a picture of Martin Luther King, and it said, "Never rioted, never looted, changed the world," which was clearly a response to some of the protests last summer, which some of them were violent in different ways.
Right.
And immediately people jumped on her. Immediately on social media said that this was racist, that she was racist. When her family tried to defend her, they called them white trash. And one of the white trash comments was like, "Oh, look at her," meaning her, I think a daughter or granddaughter, with her Black children. "Oh, look at that white trash with their Black children." Like, is there something wrong that they have Black children? Anyway, and then what the culmination of all of this was that the Thomas Merton Center, which she helped to create, put out a public letter that was put on Facebook. It's still there as the last I checked. And which they sent to all the members saying, because of this one incident, they had to disassociate themselves from Molly Rush. They would not work with her in the future. Of course, she was devastated. She's 85 years old.
Right.
In the, frankly, the autumn of her years, if not the early winter of her years, she's cast aside for one meme that, frankly, you have to really strain, I think, to find it racist. And by the way, a lot of African Americans did defend her. Though not all, of course. But the point is, this was insane. Okay, and this was hurtful, not only to her, to the organization, because what happened, predictably. Well, first of all, some of those who canceled her also said, you might as well just shut down the Merton Center. So, that was crazy, of course. But also, what naturally happened is the old timers, and I don't care if they were white or Black, the old timers who support Molly Rush decided, not as a group or a conspiracy, but as individuals, well, why am I going to donate to this organization who did this? This is crazy, right?
Right.
So they shot themselves in the foot because guess what? The old timers are the only one who have money.
Yeah.
Okay. The young folks don't have any money, not because it's their fault, but because, the good jobs are gone, basically. So, the old timers all had money. They were the ones that were giving money to the organization. And again, the organization didn't care and just said, go fuck off. Not just Molly. They really were telling everyone else to fuck off. And I know that they were telling individuals, older individuals, who had worked with the Merton Center for years. They were telling him not to come to editorial meetings, all this stuff. And that's the interesting thing about this too. While it's being portrayed, a lot of these cancellations as, you know, the anti-racist versus the racist, really a lot of this is generational. A lot of it is, frankly, may I say, ageist.
Yeah.
You know, what's one form of discrimination, which, while illegal, by the way, under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it is a type of discrimination that society basically is okay with.
Well, it's funny that you bring up ageism, and even just like just the fact that everybody lives obviously through a different era based on when they were born. I don't know how familiar you are with Charlemagne the God, but like he's a big voice for, you know, African Americans, and just, you know, always sticking up for making sure that, you know, Black voices are elevated and that they have equal opportunity in the workplace, and like that there's a, you know, a Black culture that's being injected into the consciousness of the U.S. so that, like, you know, it's not constantly co-opted all the time, like that there's actually individuals that are, you know, thought leaders that are, you know, driving the narrative, and not so much, you know, media bodies. But he is really, really big on the concept of cultural relevance, and like how you can't constantly wind back the clock and expect that because somebody did something at a certain time, and now, like years down the road, it's considered to be like a cardinal sin, that you have to, you know, crucify them then. Like the whole world let it go then. You know, you can't constantly be pretending that you can, like it's a different thing if, like, oh, we figured out that you murdered somebody. But like he brings up, you know, people who've, you know, done blackface maybe like 10, 20 years ago. And he goes, if they did it on TV, he goes, why are we ostracizing the person that did blackface? He goes, that went through a whole production team before it actually got to TV. He goes, there was a writer, there was a writer's room, there are producers, there are directors, there are network executives. Like there are a million people that this got okayed. Yeah. This got okayed by a million people before they painted that guy's, you know, face black and put him on TV to do whatever slapsticky jokes he was doing at the time. He goes, the cultural relevance of it was that it just wasn't perceived to be bad at the time. And, you know, so like the fact that we're going to then wind the clocks back and crucify these people as though they have like an opportunity to change time is absolutely crazy. So like this whole ageism thing, like, yeah, the cultural relevance is they've lived through this stuff, and yeah, they're still trying to navigate like what's happening now, but it's going to be, you know, it's hard to change your habits when you've grown up in a certain way, and you want to be right. You want to be on the right side of history all the time. But I mean, if we're not going to give any leeway for mistake, you know, what are we doing here?
Exactly. And by the way, like it really is a biblical thing, you know, he who is not sin cast the first stone. This idea that you have to be 100% pure to be in my club, you're going to have a club of nobody. And that's what's happening. You have a movement that just shrinks itself. And, you know, it's going to fail, you know, because of that. Again, in the case of Molly Rush, if someone was offended by that, pick up the phone and say, Molly, you know, there's some issues with that. I think, you know, this, and this. And she would have taken it down, which she did anyway, and she apologized for it publicly, you know. So, but no, people didn't want to do that. In fact, one of the main, you know, people who was attacking her made it clear that she said on Facebook that she had saved Molly's posts, so this could, you know, use this against her later. Right. Well, if they were that offensive, you wouldn't have saved them. And in fact, the Thomas Merton Center board, when they sent out the letter, didn't tell people what she had posted. They just said she posted a racist meme. And then later when people, like I said, well, you're not going to even tell people what she did to assess so people can assess themselves. Oh no, because that was offensive. We'd be reoffending people. Meanwhile, you have this other person who was crusading against her, who expressly saved the post and reposted them.
Right.
Be able to say, hey, look at Molly, she's a bad person. This is nonsense. No one was offended by this. I believe that. This is all bullshit. So yeah, I mean, this is no way to build a movement. And it is, and one could say, oh, well, you're saying this because you're old. First of all, I guess I'm middle-aged. I don't know, I'm 53. I will tell you that in my life, even when I was in college, the people I was close to the most in the movement were the old timers. That's who I learned from, okay? And why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I in the 80s learn from people who had been organizing and protesting since the 60s? Why wouldn't I want to know something that they knew? Why wouldn't I want to learn about the Soviet Union from people who actually went there, you know? By the time I was out of college, the Soviet Union had fallen, right? So maybe it'd be nice to know some people who had actually visited there. The point is, to this day, my closest comrades are about a generation older than me. Now, I'm sorry, there's a hubris of many young people that somehow they know everything and old people know nothing. I mean, I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense and it shouldn't be encouraged, yet that is being encouraged, right?
Right.
That view. And by the way, I'll say something else. One of the reasons, and again, it's taken me a while to think about this. One of the reasons the pandemic in the US has been so bad is because of ageism. And I'll tell you why. We cast aside the old. We send them to nursing homes when we're tired of our parents. They don't do that in China. Okay? That's why in China, the pandemic wasn't running through nursing homes because they don't have many.
Right.
Here, we throw
Not that China didn't have its own problems and how they were dealing with it.
Right.
Yeah.
But we throw our parents out in this country, right? And we send them to these homes. That is one of the reasons the pandemic spread so much through and killed so many people.
We can get a little crazier with that, with how like if we want to talk about Cuomo and the crazy corruption that he had to go, that he engaged in, that basically set the standard for how nursing homes were operating, that obviously then was wiping out old people.
Right.
So like I don't want to like make it be like, oh, just because they were in a nursing home, it's like, well, there was actually a whole lot of like, corruption on like the business side of things and the political side of things that caused that, which again, to go back to like the concept of your book, like if people want to cancel somebody, like be a little bit more politically principled. Like, yeah, Cuomo deserves to be canceled for that. He murdered thousands of people. And yet he was the glory boy of the pandemic. People they were calling people Cuomo sexuals.
I know. Ellen DeGeneres was a self-described Cuomo sexual. This is insane. And look, some of the roses, some of the bud has fallen off that rose because of sexual harassment claims and because more has come to light about how he treated the elderly, though some of that was known even back then.
Right.
And yeah, it's all this just political, it's like if my guy does it because I'm a Democrat, we don't really care, right? Instead, we're going to blame the governor in Florida because he's mishandling things. We're not going to criticize Cuomo. It's just, as you say, and that really does come down to it. There is such a lack of principle. And, in terms of war and peace, if my president, destroys Libya, then I'm just going to overlook that. Although ironically, the one thing with Trump, and I mentioned this in the book, he was criticized more for not being more warlike by liberals, right? For not bombing Syria more. So that's how far the left has just, lost its mind. But yeah, the lack of principle that people have just stuns me. And again, all the things Biden is doing, the kids in cages, he's still doing that. And yet, no, the liberals don't care anymore.
Right. It's like the continuation of Trump policies all of a sudden isn't an issue because it's Biden doing it.
Right. And by the way, Trump was continuing Obama's policies, but no one cared about that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I've really started maybe this is really what it is. Like, cancel culture truly to its core is like being politically unprincipled. You know, like I have very specific, and I'm sure you and I align on almost everything as far as like what I think that we should be focused on. You know, if you want to, why don't we I think it would be useful to kind of just say, like, what are things that people need to keep focused on? You know, why is cancel culture is taking our focus away. It's being that those keys that jingle in front of your face that divert
a baby's
you from,
face, yeah,
right, that divert you from the actual that divert you from actual policy that we should be focused on all the time. And like, what would you say to people who maybe aren't that are like kind of indoctrinated in the MSNBC, the CNN, the Fox News? Like, what would you say would be progressive policies that we need to remain focused on, that if we actually stopped this nonsense and we stayed focused on these policies, that it would be good for the larger, for the large populace?
Right. And I think that's a good place for us to end. It's always good to focus on the positive things we can do. So first of all, and as I mentioned in the book, everything I'm going to mention that we should be focusing on, the vast majority of Americans support, okay? The vast majority of Americans want Medicare for all. They want national health care. We got to fight for that. And that's going to help everybody, okay? And it's going to disproportionately help African Americans, Latinos, who disproportionately have terrible health care, right? We have to fight to stop the war machine, to stop our government from bleeding money away from social programs and into the military.
And if people need to know why, you have about 5 books that can tell them why.
Exactly. We need to focus on fighting for a living wage for working people. We need to fight for, a universal basic income. Frankly, the one guy, the Democrat, what's his name? Andrew Yang. I think he has a point. I think there should be a minimum amount of money that people should get regardless of whether they're working or not. There was actually an experiment in Vancouver, Canada, which has a horrible problem with homelessness. By the way, Vancouver, like many of these liberal cities, when you really look at the underbelly, it's not liberal at all. They speak a good game, but I just saw Vancouver was rated the most anti-Asian racist city in the world. Okay? So, but the other problem that they have is incredible problems with homelessness. They did an experiment there where they gave homeless people a very little bit of money. I forget what it was, a couple $1,000. Invariably, the homeless people within a month had gotten their lives back on their feet, gotten an apartment, all this. And we saw this here, even though the U.S. gave scraps to people during the pandemic compared to other Western countries, right? Scraps, those little scraps saved people's lives, lifted people out of poverty, and got the economy going. Okay, so we need to fight to continue those sorts of things. I would say those are the big things. And if you did those things, you would find many, many allies, not just within your liberal circles, but even in many conservative circles.
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, Alaska has a UBI that they get directly from the gas and oil industry.
Yeah, I think you'll even get 10 grand if you move there.
Which is hilarious. There, it's a Republican state.
Yeah,
you know
Vermont,
what I mean?
Vermont the same. They've been offering money if you move there. Yeah.
And then they also did, I think in California, they also did a UBI experiment, and it like wildly improved people's lives. Like, not only did they spent it on necessities for the most part, but also there were a bunch of people that utilized it as a safety net to get better jobs, that they could take time off or quit their job so that they could go on interviews and apply for better jobs. Like, they used it as a bridge to a better life, where, obviously the narrative that's being spun is if you just give people money, then like they become uninspired and they're just not going to work, and they're just, whatever, they're going to be, couch potatoes and just leech off the government. And like,
you mean people like Jeff Bezos?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So where inevitably that's where, Yang is aiming to get some of that money from, that he wants to do the UBI from. But but the data, which, this is largely a business podcast that I run. And so like what the conversation that we're having is not really in line with usually what I talk about, but it's infiltrating business on all levels. I mean, there are businesses that are kind of supporting cancel culture. There are businesses that are taking advantage of it, using identity politics to kind of like better posture themselves in the public eye. Even like Raytheon just said like they're the most diverse company there is. I was like, oh great, everybody's bombing everybody now.
Oh yeah, well how about the CIA recruitment video?
Oh my God,
which is infamous. Now, have you seen the Gray Zone's redoing of that?
Yes.
Awesome. But yeah, exactly.
Again, Gray Zone, great. For people that are looking for better news,
go to the Gray Zone. Yeah,
is amazing. I love Rising with Sagar and Crystal. I think that they're doing a great job over on the Hill Network.
Chris Hedges
on
Contact Show. Yeah,
Matt Taibbi, Matt Stoller, David Sirota, like. Go like the Glenn Greenwald. I mean, if people don't understand it, like we wouldn't even know what was going on with, the NSA and the spying and everything like that if it wasn't for Glenn Greenwald, who is endlessly smeared all the time, like for doing great work, for constantly exposing, like doing what the media is supposed to do. If they're supposed to have an adversarial relationship with power, they're not supposed to cozy up to it. That's not what that was one of I have a little bit of a journalism background. I went to school for multimedia, but also it was like partnered with journalism. And I had one professor that made it very clear. She had been in war zones like this. She had seen like the real power of doing good journalism, like had bullets fly by her. And like the one thing that she really drilled into us is like power is not your friend as a journalism. Like what you need to do is make sure that power is not running crazy, that it's reined in, and that it has people keeping an eye on it, because when you don't keep an eye on it and you don't keep it honest, it won't be honest.
Right. You speak truth to power. And Chomsky talks about that too. The role of intellectuals is to question authority, question the state. And it doesn't matter who's in the state. It doesn't matter if it's Biden or Trump. You equally have to hold them accountable.
Right. And I guess he's another guy. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with I think he's antiquated in his strategizing. I don't know if you saw his takes on like the force the vote topics and whatnot, but
yeah, I
don't necessarily agree with him on that. But
I go to Chomsky.
He's genius.
He's of course. I go to him for his critiques, not his proposed solutions. I think which is great.
More to our topic, that we disagree with him on this thing, but we know everything else that he writes about, everything else that he's been through, that he is so there's so much wisdom in that man that we can't cancel him because maybe he's got a bad take here. He's got so much good.
Because he's an anarchist. I'm not an anarchist, but so what? Yeah. His critique of U.S. foreign policy has been you know, I was going to say second to none. I would say second to one, and that's Michael Parenti, but who most people don't never even heard of, but pretty much the best, you know. So.
Right. So yeah, those types of people, and I would just add one more policy that, you know, it's obviously super in the conversation that people want, you know, police reform, and they want you know, the justice system to you know, see some reformation to it. And like, so for me, on a grand scale, I say, you know, we should be pushing to end the drug war. We should be
yes,
all of these things have been aimed at, you know, poor people and people of color
and African Americans. Yeah.
And these are, and largely it was all based on lies anyways. Like the fact that if we're talking about canceling things, like cancel our terrible policies that are I guess attacking us. Really, you know, they're eventually just turning out to be a liability to be a person.
Right. Everyone, well, for example, I would start with everyone in jail and prison right now who's there for any marijuana offense should be let go. And that would probably be half the freaking jail population. The idea, again, that now, you know, now the privileged get to smoke dope whenever they want to, you know, while, you know, poor black people are in jail because they had a little bit of dope, is a travesty. And that's got to be fixed right away.
I think Dave Chappelle pointed that out almost immediately. He was like, it's hilarious that, like, I have friends that are still in jail for, they sold a little bit of weed. And he goes, but I also have friends that own a weed company that's selling weed.
Of course. You know, like, no, it's insane that they're making millions off it. And of course, yeah. Hey, I need to go. It is Mother's Day and I need to do some stuff. But this was amazing. I enjoyed it. This time went fast. I really loved it. I'd love to come on your show again. I'd love to have a coffee with you too.
Absolutely. Let's definitely do that. Let's grab a drink. I'm like, I feel honored and privileged to have you on. I thought it was amazing. I think that you are doing great work. So you're definitely saying you're adding to the conversation in a positive way. And I love that. Before you leave, you know, just like, plug all the things. Where can people find you? Website, social media, podcasts, all those things.
Thank you. So first, please check out my books. If you go to skyhorsepublishing.com and you put my name in there, you'll see all my books and where to get them. You can also get them on Amazon if you don't find that morally reprehensible to do. You can find me on Twitter at Daniel M. Kovalik, Kovalik. I have a podcast of my own at On Point Podcasting is what it's called. I had to think about that because I don't actually produce it. I have producers who do it. Those are probably the best places to find me. And I do also write, by the way, I'm on staff at RT News, believe it or not. I actually literally work for the Russians and I write articles for them. And I'm not ashamed to say that. So.
Hey, I think some of the RT interviews are incredible. I particularly like that they have Cornel West on, and they kind of give him carte blanche to really be who Cornel West is. Not that you can really stop him.
Yeah. And not that you could ever pin down who he is. By the way, I like people like that. Well, and also Chris Hedges.
Yeah.
On Contact. That's an RT production. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but thank you so much. You know, I appreciate you giving me the time. We went over the amount of time that we said that we were going to, but, so, you know, have a great day. Let's definitely have that drink. I would love to hang out with you and just kind of pick your brain about this more.
Great. And let's go to see the Penguins together.
Let's do it. It's
all right.
Time, baby.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care. Thank you.
Have a good one.
I had a good time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.